So we're having slight technical difficulties. That's okay. Even though I'm a talker, I promise I won't go over. I will get us back on track. And I'll probably talk to you a little bit while they work on some of the display issues. It's okay because my slides are not that interesting anyway. I am a creative type, but I didn't get that creative. PowerPoint tends to be my enemy. So my name is Joel Cardella. Thank you for coming. I'm going to give you a talk that I'm titled "Stop Boiling the Ocean." And there's a reason that I call it "Stop Boiling the Ocean." I'll get into that just in a second. A little bit about me, though. So I have been in IT for about 25 years, and I've done a ton of stuff. I started as a network operator. I've managed data centers. I've done anything you can think of, information security. I've done everything other than application development, which I'm actually doing now as my job as the Director of Product Software Security, Director of Product Software Security and Privacy at Thermo Fisher Scientific. What's interesting is when I first started the job 3 months ago, I was just the Director of Product Security. And then as I came in and they were like, wow, you're doing a lot of cool stuff, my title got longer and longer and longer. So I told my boss, every time you give me a new job, I want the title to change, which means they have to print new business cards, so it's funny, right? So I'm doing this stuff. I'm doing this stuff in the product security space. And when I initially pitched this talk to GrrCon, I said, I came in as a consultant. I was working for a company called CBI, who's here. And I was doing strategic consulting with them, and I was going to talk to you about some of the customer issues that I ran into as a consultant that fit the topic of this talk. Well, as it turns out now, because I have this new role, I am that customer. So I'm actually going to talk to you about the things that are happening to me in the context of what I want to do. Once we have video, I give you my contact details. But again, a little bit about me. I love theater. I have a large theater background, and I tend to be very dramatic when I do things. And so it also makes me very, very interested in anything that makes me a better decision maker. So motivational speaking, any kind of pep talk, things like that. And that's kind of what this talk is. So this is not a technical talk. This is more of a pep talk. Really more what it is it's a talk to give you some focus and to frame some of the issues that you're probably dealing with too. So security is complex. It is a splendid display of complexity. It has breadth, it has depth, and probably the best analogy to compare it to is an ocean. Now, there is a cliche phrase called "stop boiling the ocean," which is the title of this talk. And "stop boiling the ocean" is used to denote a lot of things, but really the context that I want is, what does it take to boil an ocean, right? It's generally a task that is way too complex for us to undertake. It's not going to have any success if we try to boil an ocean. And what I'm afraid of, because I see this a lot in information security, is we tackle problems as if we are trying to boil an ocean, right? So there's a number of things that we do in this context. So for instance, I'm getting very confused because my notes aren't here. So let me just go to this view. Right. All right. So for instance, let's say you've dealt with this situation before. You have a manager, or there is a manager somewhere in your organization that wants to present something to their management or to some execs. And so they ask for tons and tons and tons of information that you spend tons and tons and tons of time putting together, which results in a stack of paper a foot high if it were printed, and when it's actually presented, is ignored by the upper management in favor of something else. That's boiling an ocean. Right? And you may have experienced that yourself. Or, for example, I was involved in a company that used to tweak their 3-year forecast every month. So every month, they'd plan the next 3 years, which was a little strange. But this was their process. This is what they did. But that's an exercise in boiling the ocean. We can't plan for something 3 years ahead of time and then expect every month to change that forecast. That's a little crazy, right? The approach there is a little off. People who want to do satisfaction surveys and they want to try to ask every possible question. How many of you have ever agreed to take a survey after the result of something and abandon the survey halfway through because you just can't stand answering the questions anymore? Right? Yeah, that's boiling the ocean. Why the hell? You know what? Square? Anybody ever use Square in here? Square has the best satisfaction survey ever. It's a smiley face and a frowny face. How was your experience? Well, I have to pick one of those. And that's actually great. It forces us into a choice. I have to be happy or I have to be sad. I can't go middle of the road. And some people want middle of the road, and I get that. But it's nice to sometimes force the choice, right? So when we talk about boiling the ocean, we want to make sure when we approach the things in InfoSec that we're not doing that. So I'm talking about things like vulnerability management. I'm talking about access management, asset management, product security, right? The stuff that I do, business continuity, compensating controls. The question my CIO used to ask me when I was a CISO, are we secure? I hated that question because the answer was always no. But the context mattered, right? Like, what are you actually asking me? This is a terrible thing, right? So these are all traps that we can fall into, right? When we're trying to do things where we can get caught up boiling the ocean, and then we wind up being unsuccessful, we wind up being demoralized, we wind up getting burnout. There's a lot of talks that I've seen lately about burnout in our space. And this is one of the reasons why. Because we're taking on the complexity of these tasks as a single unit rather than eating them one piece at a time, right? The old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One piece at a time. So one of the people I follow, his name is James Clear. And he is an author. He's also really into physical fitness, unlike myself, right? He's a world photographer, and he's a motivational speaker. And he talks about this a lot. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to do, that I'm going to talk to you about, is actually taken directly from his site. It's clear.com, C-L-E-A-R. You can look this up. But a lot of the stuff that I grabbed for this talk, I took directly from this because it's really interesting the kinds of concepts that he puts forward. And when you match them up to what we do in InfoSec, it makes a lot of sense, right? So one of the first things that he says is plan for failure, which is really kind of a weird thing, right? We've always heard that adage, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? So plan for failure actually doesn't mean what you think it means. So here's the story that he gives. There's a ceramics teacher, and they announce that they're dividing the class into two groups. All those on the left side of the studio are going to be graded solely on the quantity of the work that they produce, and all those on the right are going to be graded solely on the quality of the work that they produce. So very simple procedure. On the final day of class, he would bring in his scales and weigh the work of the quality group. 50 pounds of pots related to an A, 40 pounds is a B, blah, 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 blah. Then he graded on the quality. But the quality team only needed to produce one single pot, right? But it has to be a perfect pot to get an A. Right? So this makes sense? So we have one team who's just mass producing. We have one team where all they have to do is one thing, but they have to do it perfectly. Whatever for your definition of perfect. Okay? Now, while the quantity team is churning out piles of work, the interesting thing is they're learning from their mistakes. So the impact to their quality is actually better. They're actually getting better at what they do because they're iterating. Right? Yes, it's based on quantity. Yes, it's based on, producing within a time frame. But what was interesting was they actually wound up getting a better grade because the quality team got so mired in the process of trying to figure out what a perfect pot was, they couldn't produce it. Right? And it makes sense. If you think about it, yeah, right. If I'm doing something and I'm doing it in a way that allows me to repeat the task, make a mistake, learn from the mistake, not do that again, and keep going, right? That is actually good for me. That's what we mean by planning for failure. You know something is going to fail. That's okay. Accept that it's going to fail. Figure out what the failure is. Deal with that failure. Move on to the next iteration, right? One of the key lessons here is about repetition, and it's true in our industry too. When you are doing a thing, and I don't care what that thing is, it could be vulnerability management, it could be business continuity, could be risk management, you're going to learn when you do it more than one time, right? So over and over and over, that repetition, although it can get grating, you're learning, and that's the important thing. Another key point, being consistent is not the same as being perfect. And that's a really important point, because we get lost in perfection. I know a lot of people in the industry, and a lot of people I would classify as having some degree of OCD, right? And that OCD sometimes manifests in perfection, or being a perfectionist, right? This is not the goal that we want. We don't want perfection, because we will never attain perfection. It will never be something that's available to us. Our landscape changes by the minute, by the second, right? As I've been talking to you, the threat landscapes have changed. The threat models have changed. Things are different than they were 5 minutes ago. So consistency is the only weapon that we have to fight that battle. Perfection is an ideal we can never achieve, and we shouldn't try for it, because it's kind of silly for us to try to be perfect. What is perfect security? I don't know the answer to that. And I've been hired to figure that out. I don't know the answer to that, right? That's just the way it is. Individual failures will have little impact on your long-term successes, and that's really, really a goal for us. Well, I shouldn't say a goal because I'm going to knock goals in a minute. But the long-term success, we want to look at the total timeline, okay? So of all the things that you're doing, regardless of what it is you're doing, your goal is the long term. That's how you're going to measure your success. You're not going to look across a 2-year period and point out every single time you failed. At the end of the 2 years, you're going to look at what you've accomplished in 2 years and say, wow, this is what I did. That's super cool. Right? That's what you want to do. That's a good thing. All or nothing is a trap. And this is where goals come in, right? So we tend to be all or nothing people. We tend to be all or nothing doers. When we set a goal, the problem with goals is that they are generally all or nothing types of things. So I had a goal for a while for weight loss, okay? And actually, although I'm a large man, I was much, much larger some time ago. The goals that I was setting for myself were unrealistic because they were based on things that I didn't really have a lot of control over. So it was things like, I want to lose 20 pounds. And if I didn't lose 20 pounds, I didn't meet my goal, I failed. Right? That was all or nothing. Rather than look at the total spectrum and go, wow, over the 8 months, I lost 40 pounds. That's a really big deal. That's a much, much better achievement for me to put in my quiver than it is for me to look at an individual goal and be caught in that all or nothing trap. Right? So let's say you want to meditate. And all or nothing is, I missed a day of meditation because I want to get into meditation. That's okay if you missed a day. That's not the point. The point is you're trying to look over time and you're trying just to be more calm, more peaceful over time. And if you miss things in between, you shouldn't beat yourself up about it. All or nothing is not a path that we should take, especially in InfoSec. All or nothing is a losing scenario for us every time, right? We're going to look for little wins and we're going to revel in those wins and we're going to use them over time to be better. Okay? Here's an interesting one that somebody pointed out. If you're an active tweeter, one of the things you should do is you should download all of your tweets and count the number of words. And if you have tweeted, say, 50 to 60,000 words, you've written a book. Now, maybe it took you 5 years or 6 years to do, and I'm not an active tweeter, but I went and did this, and I'm about halfway through. I'm about 25,000 words. But if you're a very active tweeter, then retweets don't count, right? But if you are, look at that. That's a really interesting scenario because the average book is about 50 to 60,000 words. Wow. You could have written a book with all that information that you put out there. That's a really interesting way of looking at that particular thing, right? And that's what you want to do in your systems. And that's what I want to talk about is systems versus goals. So for example, if you're a coach and your goal is to win the championship, your system is everything you do to get to the championship. So it's all your practices. It's how you're tweaking your practices. It's how you're doing these things. That's your system, okay? If you're a writer, your goal is to write a book. Your system is to put yourself on a writing schedule. Not a number of words, but a schedule. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write today. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write tomorrow. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to write again. If you're working out, it's the same thing. It's not about the number of pounds that you can lift, right, necessarily. It's about how often you're going and doing that. And if you're gradually getting better over and over and over, you're going to be better at the end of whatever period we're looking at. Same for InfoSec, right? If we go in, let's take vulnerability management, for example. It's the one I like to pick on most because it's the thing that will yield you the most results, will lower the most risk, and is probably the hardest thing for you to do, okay? But vulnerability management is one of those things. If you're starting out with vulnerability management, or if you're in the middle of vulnerability management and you are frustrated because you can't get all of your assets in the scope of your vulnerability management program, that's okay. If you can get one asset today that you didn't have yesterday, you've lowered the risk, you've improved, and over time, if you can do that every day, eventually you'll make it. And that's okay, right? It's not about trying to group all this stuff together and do an entire class of something all at once and, have these successes. That's the all or nothing approach. That's what's going to get us failure. That's what's going to get us burnout. That's what's going to kill us, right? You want to do this in small sets, but you want to do it consistently. Consistency is the key. So what I'm going to say is forget about setting goals. which is terribly hypocritical of me because I literally just went through our mid-year goal setting exercise at the giant corporation that I work with, right? But what I did, rather than set individual goals, is I actually set schedules. And so again, this is from James Clear. This is something that he recommends. He says if you don't want to do this all or nothing approach, set up a schedule. So what I did is I took one of the guys that works for me and I said, all right, I want you to work on our external web page presence once a week. That was the goal. So it wasn't we have to have a web page created. It wasn't we have to have this content or that content. It was I want you to touch this once a week. I want you to make it better in some way once a week. It doesn't matter what it is. And then at the end of some period, we'll look at that, and when we're ready, we'll go. But think about that in those terms. Forget about goal setting and think about system setting or schedule setting. That's a much better approach for you to frame things in how you want to do things, right? Than it is in attacking things in that all or nothing approach. So one of the things that he talks about is he says goals reduce your current happiness, right? When you're working toward a goal, you're essentially saying, I'm not good enough yet, but I will be when I reach my goal. That's the trap, right? Because if you can't meet the goal and you've lost, then you're not good enough for whatever that is. And you can't think that way. So commit to the process, not to the goal. Again, set the schedule, set the process. I'm going to do this every day. Or I'm going to look at this every day. Or I'm going to make this contact every day. Or, in the case of vulnerability management, I'm going to improve this every day. I'm going to get one more asset than I did yesterday. Or I'm going to get, of the assets that I have, I'm going to clear one more vulnerability off the list than I did yesterday. Even if it's low level, even if it doesn't matter that much, it's still progress. That's what you want, right? This is what I'm calling, or I didn't call it, but somebody else called it, the aggregation of marginal gains, okay? Put another way, which I think is super cool, is average speed yields above average results, right? So tortoise and the hare. Everybody knows the story of the tortoise and the hare. Everybody focuses on the fact that the hare was screwing around and was doing all this stuff and didn't make it to the finish line before the tortoise. That's not actually the part of the story that matters. What matters is the tortoise that was slow and steady, that was edging his way closer and closer with every step, was getting better and better and better. He was finding different paths. He was taking different modes. Maybe he was even getting stronger and faster to get to the goal. The tortoise wasn't competing against the hare. The tortoise was competing against himself. And that's what everybody in this room is doing. When you are setting all or nothing goals, and when you're trying to tackle these problems, and when you're trying to boil an ocean, you are fighting yourself. And you will lose that battle every time. Because that other self is better than you, because they're a perfectionist ideal that you can never achieve. Does that make sense? Right? And you got to get out of that mindset. You got to get out of that mindset. And I know, I work for a very large corporation. I get that we have to set goals. I get that we have to produce things, that we have to have deliverables and things like that. But I do this too. And I'm going to show you how I do that. Well, I'll talk about how I'll show you I'll do that. Goals are at odds with long-term progress. So you think your goal is going to keep you motivated over the long term, but it's really not always true. And motivation is a tricky thing too, because motivation is actually the worst part about being motivated, because you lose it, right? You have motivation one day, you don't have it the next day for whatever reason. Other things take over, you reprioritize. It's not as interesting as it seemed when you were first motivated to do whatever that thing is, okay? But if you look at military systems, for example, so the special operations units in military, there's a reason that they do things the way they do. So you will see them practicing their regimen, whether it's raining, whether it's snowing, whether it's sunny, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. They do it because the repetition is what builds the success, right? It's that average speed yields above average results things. It doesn't matter that there are these other factors doing it. And we can tend to get caught in those traps where we just go, oh, today's not a good day for that. Even though I'm motivated to do it, today's not a good day. And so it actually deconstructs you and takes you away from the thing that you want to do. Okay? So to overcome that, just let go of the need for immediate results. You don't need immediate results. You have to think about what's the long game. You have to think about how am I going to be improved as I do this for whatever time frame I'm doing it for. Right? Because immediate results, they feed our ego. That's about all they do. And that goes away too, pretty quickly. So you got to be really careful about that stuff. Goals suggest that you can control things that you don't have control over because you can't predict the future, right? If I set a goal for my vulnerability management system that I'm going to have all of my assets in it by the end of 2018, and I'm reliant on 2 or 3 other IT groups to make that happen, how could I possibly achieve that goal? It would be monumental. It would be Herculean, right? Beyond my ability to actually make happen. And so it causes problems for us. So one of the things you want to do to help overcome that is you want to build feedback loops. And this is a really important part. This is something I learned when I did this talk. I understand feedback loops and I understand what the value of them is, but I didn't really understand the value of them when it comes to committing to a system or committing to a process until after I really thought about what it was I was going to do. And that's what I want to talk to you about, is what I was going to do, or what I am going to do. Awesome. I love this. This is super weird. Okay. All right. So the margin between good and great is narrower than it seems. When you begin with a slight edge over the competition, it compounds with each additional contest. All right, this is the aggregation of marginal gains. So there's actually a graph that I would show you. This is probably the most interesting thing that I would show you visually, but I'll describe it. Let's say this represents time. So on the bottom, we have time. And we'll say it goes from 0 to 365, so a year. Okay? That's our timeline. If I can do something 1% better each day, or I can do something 1% worse each day, what does the graph look like? So I've got a line, that's my horizontal line, that is my year. My worst line drops about 30%. So I'm about 30% worse. Yeah, you think so? Okay. At the end of a year than when I started. Okay? Which is interesting. Because what it means is, kind of when I start at the bottom, I can't really get much lower than where I'm already at, right? But on the other side, on my improvement side, on my improvement goal, my line goes like this, and it hooks up about 90 to 120 days in. It hooks up, and it gains incrementally incredibly fast. And it's about, the difference between the start of the year and the end of the year is about 3,700% of improvement. So if you can quantify something, or even qualify something, to be 1% better when you start out, at the end of a year, you can have a 3,700% improvement in whatever it is you're doing, right? And it's a really interesting concept when you think about it. Wow, and it makes sense. If I'm doing something poorly, continue to do it poorly, at some point it's just going to bottom out and I'm not going to get much worse at it than I possibly can get. But if I'm doing something well, consistently, over and over and over and over, I'm going to get really good at it. Does that make sense? Do you believe it? Because it's hard to believe. But it really is true. If you can really focus on it and you can really make it happen, you'll be surprised at what you can accomplish over that time. What's that? This? So one of the stories I want to tell you about is a British cycling team called Team Sky. Any cyclists in here? Anybody familiar with Team Sky? All right, so a couple of people. So there's in 2010, a gentleman by the name of Dave Brailsford, Sir Dave Brailsford, was tasked with the monumental effort of getting a British cyclist to win the Tour de France. This had never happened before. Okay, so Dave Brailsford did things that follow this pattern, this aggregation of marginal gains. Of course, he did things that you would expect. He looked at their bicycles. He looked at the weight. He looked at the seats. He looked at the tires. He looked at the conditions that they were riding in. He looked at the ergonomics of what those things are. These are the really obvious things that he did. But what's really interesting is he said, you know what? There's more to cycling than just being on a bicycle and riding it from point A to point B. These are human beings. These are human systems that we're dealing with. So what he did is he started to look at the human systems. And he started to find out, he started to look at things like, for example, what pillows offered the best sleep? and having the cyclists take those pillows with them to the hotels. Which hotels were in the best locations to promote sleep? He looked at what is the most effective type of massage gels. He looked at teaching riders the best way to wash their hands to avoid infection and get sick. Right? Like, how weird is that? You would never think of that when you're thinking about training a sports team, that you would want to teach them how to wash their hands. Right? My wife's a kindergarten teacher. She's got to do this every day. Right? But it's funny. But it's part of that system. When you think about the human system and you want to think about all the things associated with it, his concept was, we're going to get better at each one of these things inside this human system, and in 5 years, we're going to win a Tour de France. He was actually wrong. They did it in 3. Which is amazing. And it's the first time it ever happened. Now, there's a sort of a sad side to the story, because it's just coming out now that there's some doping accusations and some other things that are happening. So it's a great story if you sort of ignore that part of it. However, I've looked into the doping accusations, and it turns out most of the accusations were actually before Dave Brailsford took over. So that's a very interesting part of that story too. There's a whole sordid history there, the politics of the World Doping Agency and all this stuff. But anyway, it's very interesting that this is the approach, and now they've actually won. They just won in 2017. I think they won in 2018. The Brits are on their way. They are crushing the Tour de France because they're keeping this up. They're keeping the system up. They're looking at this aggregation of marginal gains. They're looking at what it takes to get better a little bit every day, every competition, everything. And that's what you can do. That's what you have control over. You can control the fact that you can do a little bit more every day. And that's a great thing, right? That's hope. So these tiny gains that I was going to show you on the graph here, in the beginning, there's basically no difference between making a choice that's 1% better or 1% worse. There really isn't. You can choose to do nothing. You can choose to do it poorly, right, or more poorly, or you can choose to do it better. And in the beginning, it doesn't really matter. But then, like I said, right around about the 100-day mark, things start to pick up, and then after that, it rockets. It's exponential. The amount of great effort that pays off, the return on your investment happens. It's absolutely incredible. So in my job, product security really requires 3 essential components. In order to do a good job, in order for me to do the things I want to do, I have to have process rigor. So I need robust and repeatable ongoing processes for product security. Now again, this is not something I have control over, but I know this is something I need. I have to train the people who are the developers, the people who are the product component manufacturers, the network analysts, the research and development teams. I have to teach them about robust and repeatable processes and get them into process modes where we can do these things, right, in robust and repeatable way. The other thing I need is I need precise documentation, and I need this both internally and externally. So I've got to be able to write down what it is our stuff does, how it does it, what the components are that make it up. And I've got to be able to publish information similar to that, or exactly that, externally to customers. So I need to have the ability to be concise, to be clear, right? To have the right mode of communication that customers can receive information, both internal and external. Those are very important things. And the third thing I need controls and ongoing validation for both privacy and security, right? Because I have to keep in mind there's a privacy component to what I do. My company makes medical devices, for example. That's one of the lines of business that we have. Those medical devices are subject to FDA regulations. The FDA demands certain levels of security controls, okay? That's just one compliance framework. There's many more out there that we have to comply with. So I have to have the controls for both privacy and security because they're mandated. I've got to have the documentation that's clear and concise, and I've got to have processes and methodologies that people can follow, that are repeatable, that they can learn from, that we can analyze, that we can do these things on, right? So that's what I know walking into the role for product security. Now, one of the things that James Clear talks about is he talks about identity-based habits, and he actually wrote a book called Atomic Habits, and you can look it up. What's interesting about it is the way that he approaches this whole thing. So there's a lot of in the building a habit space, there's a lot of stuff that's out there. There's a lot of sort of misinformation. There's a lot of weird stuff. Stephen Covey did a lot of stuff with habits, right? The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. You probably heard the thing, it only takes us 21 days to form a habit, right? Turns out that's completely wrong. There's actual studies out of Stanford that will tell you how long it takes to make a habit, and it's somewhere between 66 and 100 days that actually makes a habit. So you have to do something the same way 66 to 100 days in a row in order for it to become habitual and that you don't think about it, right? Anybody can commit to that? I can't. There's no way. Not the same way every time. That would drive me insane, right? So he talks about this thing, and he says, look, he goes, when you are trying to form a habit, instead of thinking about the thing that you want to do, think about it from this perspective. Think about the person that you want to be. He calls this identity-based habits, right? So decide on the type of person you want to be, number one, and then prove it to yourself with the small wins. And that's really interesting. So the approach here then is you think about not what I want to be, but who I want to be. And then you go about building the foundation and marching toward that goal, right? So here's what I did. I decided my identity is I wanted to be the person that puts Thermo Fisher product security on the map. Now, the interesting thing about my space right now is it's very greenfield. There's not a lot of people out there who are doing it well, that are doing it right. There's not a lot I can pattern myself after. I've seen some of our competitors. I've actually reached out and talked to them to find out about what it is they do. Because in the spirit of making us all better, everybody wants to do better. So I'm bringing people to the table to talk about this stuff, to say, what can we do to make this better? Even if we're competitors, that's okay. But I'm going to talk to customers. I'm going to talk to all these people because I want to figure this out. I want to be the person that puts us on. When people say product security, oh, talk to Thermo Fisher. They know what they're doing. That's what I want to do. That's the kind of person I want to be. I want people to talk about us as a leader in the space, and I want those structures to be emulated. I want people to pattern themselves after us and go, that's the kind of stuff that we need you to do. I want the FDA to come to me when they're having problems talking to another vendor or a provider or thinking about their next compliance framework and saying, we want to talk to you guys about this because you're doing well. Cool, let's do that. I love that. I want to expand my own knowledge, and I want to understand the space because of its importance to the future and the fact that my work is directly impacting patient lives. So I literally work in a field in information security where life or death is a real scenario. And I've never had that experience before. And I will tell you, it's invigorating for me. It's a wonderful thing. I love being there. I think it's incredible. I also think it's challenging and terrifying. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what the next step is. So I take it one day at a time, which is the only way I can do it. But my identity-based habits, the things that I want to do, are structured around those three things. Putting us on the map, being something that people want to aspire to emulate to, and expand my own knowledge and understanding of the subjects so I can get better at them, right? So my feedback loop is this. And again, it'd look better up here. But 3 months ago, there was no one in charge of product security at Thermo Fisher. We had no direction for application developers. We had a bug bounty program, but it had very little feedback and very little activity in it. We had no defined processes for reporting vulnerabilities, and we had no presence in the community. Thanks. Today, there's me and a team of 4 people. So this is 3 months later. There's me and a team of 4 people. We have 9 open positions that are in progress or planned. I've got a developer pipeline that includes automatic code scanning, and of all my developer teams, of which there are probably 30 or 40, I've got 1 team in the pipeline doing automatic code scanning. That's a huge success. I can't look at the other 39 and go, well, we failed because they're not doing it. That's the totally wrong way, right? That's the all or nothing. I can't do that. I've got to say, wow, we've got 1 team who are doing it. 1 team is no longer opening tickets asking us to scan code. They're doing it automatically. That's a huge success. That's huge. I have action on bug reports and a 22% fix rate now for reported vulnerabilities. Whereas before it was 0. They were just being reported and dying. But we've actually taken action. We've gotten some vulnerabilities cleared. We've got other vulnerabilities that are still in progress and taking forever to fix. But I have no control over that. I can't focus on that. All I can do is keep encouraging those teams that are part of that to say, hey, we still have this issue out there. What can we do? How can we move it along? How can I help you? Right? That's okay. I have a process to report vulnerabilities outside the bug bounty that's being tracked, and I'm doing follow-up on it. I'm participating in the HISAC, used to be the NHISAC, they just changed their name. The HISAC participation in working groups, so we have several working group participations that we're doing there where we're talking to other people, we're talking to health delivery organizations, we're talking to medical device manufacturers. We're learning a lot as we talk. Sometimes it's really circular. Sometimes it's a terrible, terrible thing. Other times I learn a lot. Other times I only learn a little bit, and that's okay. Learning a little bit made me that much better and allows me to make a that much better decision the next time that rolls along. That's an important thing. I also did a successful debut at DEF CON with IoT Devices. So we showed up to DEF CON, and my company actually deals in a lot of different spaces. We have medical device manufacturing. We also do a lot of manufacturing for forensics laboratories, like police forensics laboratories. And we showed up to DEF CON, and I had 2 devices at DEF CON, which were drug scanners. Very popular at DEF CON for some reason, right? And so these little scanners, people would come up and they would test substances. They were testing M&Ms and Skittles and other substances that they were bringing up, right? And it was showing this thing, and people were really interested in it. And one of the pieces of feedback I got that was awesome was, we love the fact that you guys came here, but we love the fact that you had your logo out for everybody to see where it came from. That's an important thing. That was a huge piece of feedback for me, to say, yes, that's that recognition I'm looking for. I want people to see that logo. I want people to know that we're out there. When I took the job, I told my boss, I said, this job is not worth doing unless we're willing to risk putting ourselves out there and getting punched really hard and falling down. That's the only way that we're going to get better at what we want to do, is just to say, yeah, we acknowledge the fact that we have problems. We are working on those problems. We are dealing with them incrementally, and we will get better, right? So a year from now, come and talk to me, and I'll tell you about what my successes are. Here's the other thing I'm doing, though, and this occurred to me actually as I was writing the talk. I'm going to commit to a feedback loop. Here's my commitment. My commitment is, at the end of every day, I'm going to have my team do a little scrum. And in that scrum, we're going to discuss what we did that day that improved us 1%. It's not going to go long, 10 minutes or less, maybe 5 minutes, but we're just going to say, hey, I did this thing today, or this thing happened to me today, or I found out this piece of information today. And I'm going to capture that, and I'm going to log that, and I'm going to have pages and pages and pages of this after some amount of time, and I'm going to report on it. So when people ask me, how are you doing? I'm going to go, I'm doing pretty damn well. Right? Because it's right there. It's right there for me. You can do the same thing. These are things you have control over, but you have to be consistent. And this will be my biggest challenge, is making this consistent. I will be honest with you. Priorities shift, things happen, cons, right? I'm a volunteer at a lot of cons. I'm going to get out there, I'm going to do this. But my commitment, I said, no, I'm going to do this every day, or every work day. Every work day, we're going to meet and we're going to say, this is what I had today that was my 1%. And we're going to log it all and go crazy. And it's going to be an amazing thing at the end of a year. I'm looking very forward to it. So we call this the 1% rule. The 1% rule states that over time, the majority of rewards in a given field will accumulate to the people, teams, and organizations that maintain a 1% advantage over the alternatives. Oh, just a 1% advantage is all you need to refocus, reframe, get yourself back in the game, move away from the burnout. And you might have management pushing on you saying, do better. You might have them saying, this isn't good enough, right? That happens. You have to tune out the noise. You have to say, okay, that's the noise. This is the result. That's what matters. You don't need to be twice as good to get twice the results. You just need to be a little bit better. This is that old joke, I don't need to be faster than the bear, I just need to be faster than you, right? That's really what it is. I just need to be slightly better. I don't need to be twice as good to get twice my results. If I'm a little bit better every day, it's going to be twice, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times, 3,700 times. Average speeds yields above average results. I think I'm going to have that printed out, put it like on a sign in my office. I love that. And it's going to drive people nuts because we literally have people moving at the speed of light around us. Okay, I'm fine with that. As long as I am improving. If they're moving at the speed of light, but they're not making any progress, that's not progress. If I'm making progress and I'm moving slow, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Keep moving. You don't need to dash, and you may trip and fall if you do. Keep improving just 1% each day. Be consistent in your approach. That is what I have to tell you. Anybody have any questions? Does anybody like to challenge this and say, no, this is wrong? I like to hear this is awesome. I thought it was awesome too. And honestly, I mean, I'm as invested as you are at this point with it, because all I was doing was just assembling the information. But as I was putting the information together, I was like, this makes so much sense, right? It makes so much sense. Why am I setting all or nothing goals? That's insane. I'm doing that to myself. Why am I trying to put my arms around things I have no control over, right? I'll address them as best I can, but I can't control them. So if I can't control them, I'm not going to go near them when it comes to trying to rate my success, right? There's another adage, which is never use somebody else's ruler to measure your own success, right? Live that one. This has taken me a long time. I am a disturbed individual. It has taken me a long time to learn that, right? Do not measure your success with someone else's ruler. It is so, so important. Look around you. I have friends in this industry who are highly successful, amazingly successful, and I wish them all the success and best of luck in the world. But I will not, I refuse to say they are better than I am because of their success. That's a trap. Don't get in that trap, right? You are successful. Do your 1% a day. At the end of a year, at the end of 2, at the end of 5, hell, at the end of 100 days, you're going to be amazed. But I encourage you to log those results, because you got to be able to go back and look at them. And when you're feeling bad, when you're feeling burnout, when you're feeling demoralized, look at that list and be like, wow, this is everything I did. This is fantastic. Right? So there it is. There's my motivational talk. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you can be motivated. I also encourage you, by the way, Thermo Fisher, we are hiring all kinds of security jobs, all kinds of IT jobs. Go to our website, thermofisher.com. There's all kinds of things there. You'll be amazed. Right.